Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Paranoid Stories. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching, so YouTube will keep showing you stories like this. Now, let's begin. I'm a commercial census taker, not exactly a job that sounds dangerous. I drive to isolated properties, knock on doors, fill out forms. Boring work, mostly. But there's one visit I can't shake, and I need to tell someone about it, even if it sounds insane. This was late September, up near the Canadian border in Washington state. I'd been assigned a cluster of remote homesteads scattered across logging roads that barely qualified as roads anymore. The kind of places where your GPS gives up and you're navigating by landmarks that may or may not still exist. Most of these properties were hunting cabins or seasonal residences, which meant a lot of empty driveways and locked doors. Standard procedure: leave a notice, mark it down, move on. The cabin I'm talking about was the last one on my list that day. I almost didn't find it. The turnoff was hidden behind overgrown blackberry bushes, and the track leading in was more like a hiking trail than a driveway. My sedan bottomed out twice before I reached the clearing. The cabin itself looked abandoned. Mossy roof, peeling paint, one window covered with yellowed newspaper from the inside. But there was a truck parked out front, an old Chevy, maybe 70s vintage with Washington plates. Someone lived here or at least visited. I knocked, waited, knocked again, louder this time. Nothing. The door wasn't locked. It swung open when I leaned against it slightly, which violated about 3 different protocols, but I was tired and losing daylight. I called out, identified myself, waited for a response. The interior was dim, but I could see enough. One room, basically. Kitchenette along the back wall, wood stove in the corner, a table in the center. And that table stopped me cold. 4 place settings. 4 plates with food on them, looked like beans and cornbread, maybe some kind of stew. 4 mugs, still half full of what smelled like coffee when I got closer. The food was cold but not spoiled. Recent, maybe that morning or the night before. 4 chairs pushed back slightly, like people had just stood up mid-meal. But no people. No sounds from outside, no footsteps, nothing. Here's the thing that got under my skin immediately, the precision of it. The plates were arranged perfectly, evenly spaced. The mugs were all positioned at the same angle to the right of each plate. The chairs were pushed back the exact same distance. It looked staged, but why would anyone stage an abandoned meal? I called out again. My voice sounded too loud in that small space. I checked the other corners of the room, a cot against one wall, some folded blankets, a couple of boxes, no personal items I could see, no photos, no books, nothing that told me who lived here. I should have left right then. I had enough information to file my report, but something about those 4 identical settings made me walk around the table, looking at each place. The food on each plate was distributed the same way. The coffee in each mug filled to the same level. When I looked closer at the chairs, I noticed the dust patterns on the floor, 4 sets of shoe prints, all approximately the same size, all positioned identically in front of each chair. My hands were shaking when I took my photos for documentation. I kept expecting someone to walk in to explain this somehow. I even checked the truck outside, locked, nothing visible through the windows, except an empty gun rack. I finished my notes in the car. My dash cam was running the whole time, which is standard procedure when I'm on remote properties. I drove out faster than I should have, scraping my undercarriage again on the way back to the main road. That would have been the end of it. Strange house, weird scene, but nothing I couldn't rationalize. People do odd things in isolation. Maybe it was some kind of art project or a religious thing or just eccentric behavior from folks who wanted to be left alone. But 3 days later, I was reviewing my dashcam footage. I do this periodically to log mileage and document property conditions. I was fast-forwarding through the footage from that day when I caught something in the frame as I was pulling away from the cabin. I backed it up, watched it again at normal speed. As my car turned around in the clearing, the camera briefly captured the area behind where I'd been parked. Just for a moment, maybe 2 seconds of footage, before the angle shifted as I completed the turn, 4 figures, standing in a line, perfectly still. They were maybe 20 feet behind my car, positioned between the cabin and the tree line. The footage was grainy, late afternoon shadows making everything muddy, but I could see them clearly enough. 4 people standing shoulder to shoulder, evenly spaced. They weren't moving, not at all. No shift in posture, no turning heads, nothing. Just standing there facing my car, facing me. I must have watched that 2-second clip 50 times. I couldn't make out faces, too much shadow, too much distance, but the proportions were identical. Same height, same build, same posture. They were wearing dark clothing, or maybe the shadows just made it look that way. Their arms hung at their sides. The part that made my stomach drop was realizing they must have been standing there the entire time I was at the cabin. While I was inside, looking at those place settings, calling out, taking photos, while I was checking the truck, while I was sitting in my car doing paperwork. They were out there behind my vehicle watching me in complete silence. I never heard them, never saw any movement through the windows or mirrors. They were just there, waiting for me to leave. I reported it to my supervisor, tried to explain what I'd found. She was sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful. Remote property residents have rights to privacy, and I hadn't witnessed any criminal activity. She suggested maybe they were shy or protective of their land, or had reasons to avoid census takers. All reasonable explanations that did nothing to address what I'd seen in that footage. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were watching to make sure I wasn't a threat. Maybe they have social anxiety or past trauma. Maybe the identical postures and spacing were coincidental, or my camera distorted things somehow. But I keep coming back to those 4 place settings, arranged with that same impossible precision, and those 4 figures standing in perfect formation, not moving a muscle while I was 20 feet away. The worst part isn't what I saw. It's knowing they let me leave. They stood there silent and still and made a collective decision to let me drive away. I wasn't a threat to them. I was something to observe, to study, to let pass through. And when I think about that, about being watched that closely, assessed that carefully, and dismissed that deliberately, I can't sleep right anymore. I still have that footage. I've thought about deleting it, but I can't. Sometimes late at night I pull it up and watch those 2 seconds again, trying to see something I missed, some detail that would make it make sense. But all I see are 4 figures perfectly aligned watching me leave, and I know with absolute certainty that if I had turned around, if I had walked back toward them, they would have just stood there, waiting until I got close enough to see their faces. I need to tell someone about this, even if it sounds paranoid. I'm a map maker, freelance, mostly digital cartography for state parks and hiking apps. 3 days alone in the backcountry verifying trail data isn't unusual for me. What happened in Gifford Pinchot last month, though, I still can't rationalize it. The assignment was straightforward. The Forest Service needed updated coordinates for decommissioned logging roads that hikers kept mistaking for maintained trails. I'd camp at a different site each night, cover maybe 8 miles a day with my GPS unit, document any significant changes. Easy work, I've done it dozens of times. The first cairn appeared on day 2, about a mile down Forest Road 2516. Just a small stack of stones beside the overgrown track. 5 smooth river rocks balanced precisely. I almost walked past it. Cairns aren't uncommon in the backcountry. Hikers build them at trail junctions or viewpoints. But this one marked nothing. No intersection, no landmark, just sitting there in the middle of dense forest where the canopy blocked out most of the light. I documented its location out of habit and moved on. By late afternoon, I'd found 6 more, all identical, 5 stones each, stacked with the same careful precision. They followed no pattern I could see. One sat near a rotted stump, another beside a seasonal creek bed, one in a small clearing that didn't appear on any of my maps. Each time I approached one, my GPS signal would fluctuate slightly, jumping a few meters before stabilizing. Equipment glitch, I figured. The forest canopy plays hell with satellite reception. I made camp that evening about 3 miles from the logging road in a flat area near a reliable water source. Standard protocol for me. Set up before dark, document the day's findings, heat a freeze-dried meal, sleep. The forest was quiet that night. No wind, no animal sounds, just that thick silence you sometimes get in old-growth timber. I didn't think about the cairns again until morning. When I returned to Forest Road 2516 the next day, different approach coming from the east to complete my survey grid, the cairns had changed, not moved, rearranged. They formed a perfect line now, each stack exactly 20 meters from the next, stretching nearly 200 meters through the forest. The line pointed northwest, directly toward my campsite. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes trying to make sense of it. Someone would have had to work through the night to rebuild them like this, in complete darkness, through dense undergrowth, and they'd need to know exactly where I was camped, a location I'd chosen randomly, miles from any marked trail. My hands were shaking when I checked my GPS. The line's bearing was 312 degrees. I pulled up my camp coordinates. The alignment was perfect. Margin of error, less than 2 degrees. I told myself it was coincidence. Maybe the cans had always been in a line, and I just misremembered their positions. Memories unreliable, especially in unfamiliar terrain, but I'd photographed each one. I pulled up the images on my camera's display screen. No, they'd definitely been scattered before. The professional thing would have been to document this as an anomaly and continue the survey, but something about the precision of it, the patient geometry, made my throat tight. I packed my GPS unit and started back toward camp, moving faster than I should have through the underbrush. That's when I found the observation point. About 60 meters from my tent, on a slight rise behind a fallen Douglas fir, someone had cleared away the duff and small branches. The spot offered an unobstructed view of my entire campsite. They could have watched me cook dinner, watched me organize my gear, watched me sleep. The cleared area was roughly 3 feet across. No footprints, no disturbed vegetation leading to or from it, just that one carefully prepared space. I didn't pack up immediately. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just leave? Here's why. My truck was parked 7 miles away at the trailhead, and the most direct route back passed within a quarter mile of where those cans were now arranged. The alternative was a 12-mile detour through terrain I hadn't surveyed, with darkness coming in maybe 4 hours. Moving through unfamiliar forest at night, possibly being followed by someone who clearly knew these woods better than I did, that felt more dangerous than staying put. So I stayed. But I moved my tent to a different location, maybe 200 meters south, tucked into a dense thicket of young hemlocks where it couldn't be easily seen. I kept my bear spray clipped to my belt. I didn't build a fire. The night was worse than I expected. Not because anything happened, because nothing did. Just that same heavy silence, pressing in from all sides. I kept my headlamp off, sitting in complete darkness inside the tent, listening. At some point, maybe 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps, not crashing through brush. Careful placement, slow and deliberate, maybe 30 feet away. They circled my old campsite for several minutes, then stopped. I didn't sleep. At first light, I packed everything and started hiking out, taking the longer route. I didn't care about the extra miles anymore. But before I left, I walked back to where I'd camped the first night. Someone had built a new cairn there. 7 stones this time, stacked beside the tent's exact footprint, and next to it, arranged in a small semicircle, 5 of my own survey markers. Bright orange plastic flags I'd placed 2 days earlier to mark waypoints, miles apart from each other. Someone had collected them, brought them here, displayed them. The hike out took 6 hours. I didn't stop, didn't look back. When I reached my truck, I found a single river stone placed on the hood, balanced perfectly in the center. I reported it to the ranger station, described the cairns, the observation point, everything. They said they'd send someone to check it out. 2 weeks later, they called back. They'd found the old logging road, but no cairns, no cleared observation point, no evidence of anyone camping in the area recently. They suggested I might have been disoriented, that the forest can play tricks on perception, especially when you're alone for multiple days. What I can't photograph is the feeling that stayed with me. Not fear exactly, something colder, the certainty that I was being documented, studied, that someone out there had spent days learning my patterns, my routes, my habits, and wanted me to know they had. I finished the mapping contract from my apartment using satellite imagery instead of ground surveys. Told the Forest Service I'd had an equipment failure. They didn't push back. Last week I got a new assignment. Different forest, different state. I said no. I haven't gone back into the backcountry since Gifford Pinchot. I probably never will. Because here's what I can't stop thinking about. How many days had they been watching before I found that first cairn? And how did they know I'd find it at all? My name's Frank Richard. I'm 38. Been a wildlife photographer for the better part of 15 years. I shoot birds mostly, the rare ones that serious ornithologists pay good money to document. Last April, I set up a network of trail cameras in the Columbia River Gorge to capture footage of a western screech owl that had been spotted in the area. High-definition cameras, motion-activated, positioned at strategic intervals along a 3-mile stretch of dense forest. Nothing I hadn't done 100 times before. The first week of footage was standard: deer passing through at dusk, raccoons investigating the equipment, the occasional coyote. I collect the SD cards every Monday, review everything that weekend. Tedious work, but necessary. You learn to scan through hours of nothing, looking for those few seconds of usable material. It was during my second review session that I noticed him. Frame 1447 of camera 3, 4:32 in the morning. There's a figure standing about 30 feet back from the lens, partially obscured by a thicket of young Douglas firs. At first I thought it was a hiker who'd gotten turned around in the dark, maybe spotted my camera's infrared light. But something about the posture was off, too still. The clothing was dark, not hiking gear, just dark fabric with no reflective elements, no visible texture. And the face, or where a face should have been, was just a smooth darkness. I marked the timestamp and kept scrolling. Nothing else unusual that night. Wednesday's footage from camera 5, 4:29 in the morning. Same figure, different location. Standing between 2 red cedars this time, maybe 40 feet from the lens. Same perfect stillness, same featureless clothing. And here's what made my stomach drop. The figure was positioned at an angle that suggested they were looking directly at the camera. Not past it, not near it, at it. I should mention that these cameras are deliberately camouflaged. I use woodland pattern cases, mount them at irregular heights, sometimes even cover them with loose branches. The whole point is that nothing notices them. But this person, or whatever it was, had found 2 cameras in different locations, both times appearing in the narrow window between 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock in the morning. I know what you're thinking. Vandals, right? People who sabotage trail cams for fun. Except there was no sabotage. The cameras were untouched. No graffiti, no repositioning, no theft. Just this silent acknowledgement of their presence. The following Monday, I pulled cards from all 6 cameras. 3 of them had the figure. Camera 3 again, 4:34 in the morning, slightly closer this time, maybe 25 feet out. Camera 5, 4:27 in the morning, same position as before. And camera 1, which I'd mounted on the north end of my survey area, 4:41 in the morning, standing in a small clearing where I'd specifically positioned the camera to capture the open sky. I started examining the frames more carefully. The figure never appeared in consecutive images. The cameras shoot in 5-second intervals when motion is detected, so you'd see an empty frame, then the figure, then empty again. No approach, no departure, just presence. Like they understood the camera's timing perfectly and only revealed themselves in that specific window. Here's where my hands start shaking even now. I noticed that in every single frame where the figure appeared, they were positioned at the exact distance where a human face would be just barely unidentifiable at the camera's resolution. Not close enough for detail, but close enough to be undeniably present. Deliberate positioning. I considered calling it in. Park rangers, maybe the county sheriff. But saying what exactly? Someone standing near my cameras before dawn? That's not illegal. And explaining the pattern, the timing, the way they seemed to know exactly where each camera was hidden. I'd sound paranoid. Instead, I did something stupid. I went out there. Wednesday morning, 3:45 in the morning, I hiked in with a headlamp and positioned myself about 50 yards from camera 3 downwind behind a fallen hemlock that gave me a sight line to the camera's location. Temperature was maybe 40 degrees. Light rain. I turned off my headlamp and waited. The forest at that hour isn't silent exactly. There's movement, small animals, branches settling, water dripping. But there's a quality to it that's different from daytime sounds. Everything feels muffled, compressed. At 4:28 by my watch, I heard something that wasn't right. Not footsteps, more like displacement, the sound of air moving around something large. And then a smell reached me. Not decay, not exactly. More like old paper and standing water. I couldn't see anything. My eyes had adjusted to the darkness, but the rain was making everything indistinct. I waited, not moving, barely breathing. The smell got stronger. At 4:35, I turned on my headlamp. The beam cut through the rain about 60 feet before diffusing. Nothing. No one. I swept the light across the area where camera 3 was mounted, then back toward the trail. Empty forest. I kept the light on and approached the camera. Checked the housing, undisturbed. The SD card was recording, everything normal. I turned back toward my observation point, playing the light across the trees. That's when I saw the footprints. Not near the camera, near where I'd been hiding. A single set of prints in the soft earth behind the fallen hemlock, in the exact spot where I'd been sitting 10 minutes earlier. Barefoot prints, adult-sized. The impressions were deep, like whoever made them had been standing there for a long time, weight shifting slightly between feet. They led away from the log back into the forest and stopped after maybe 15 feet. Just ended. No continuing trail, no indication of where they'd come from or gone to. I left. Didn't collect the SD card, didn't check the other cameras. Just backed away slowly until I hit the trail, then walked very fast back to my truck. The next Monday, I went back during daylight, collected all 6 cards. I was hoping the figure wouldn't appear again, that maybe my presence had scared them off. All 6 cameras had footage, same time window, same positioning, but now there was a variation. In each frame where the figure appeared, they were closer than before. Not dramatically closer, maybe 5 or 6 feet nearer to each camera. But the progression was clear. They were approaching. And in the footage from camera 3, the one I'd sat near, there was something else. At 4:34 in the morning, the figure was visible in the frame as usual. But at 4:41, 7 minutes after I'd turned on my headlamp and left, there was a second image. The camera had triggered again. This time the figure was at the very edge of the frame, almost out of view. But the angle had changed. They weren't looking at the camera anymore. They were looking in the direction I'd gone. I haven't been back since. The cameras are still out there as far as I know. My client found another photographer to complete the owl documentation. I told him I had a family emergency. He didn't push. Sometimes I think about those prints behind the log, how close they were, how whoever made them had been standing directly behind me in the dark while I waited, watching the same empty forest I was watching, maybe for hours before I arrived. And I think about the last frame on that SD card, the figure turned away from the camera, already tracking which direction I'd walked. I'm a building inspector, 40 years old, been doing this for 15 years, and I don't spook easily. I've crawled through condemned buildings where the floors were half rotted and the air smelled like death. I'm telling you this so you understand I'm not someone who jumps at shadows. Last September, I took 2 weeks off to hike the North Cascades. My wife had been after me to take a real vacation for years, and I'd been planning this route for months. It was an older trail, one that didn't see much traffic anymore since they'd opened the newer routes further west. I liked that. Fewer people, more quiet. The first 3 days were perfect. Crisp air, clear skies, the kind of solitude that makes you remember why you bothered living in the city in the first place. On the fourth day, around 2 in the afternoon, I came across the fence. At first, I thought it was some kind of park boundary marker I'd missed on the maps. It was about 4 feet high, made of weathered wood posts connected by horizontal rails. The strange thing was how well maintained it looked. No rot, no missing boards, just this perfectly straight line of fencing running perpendicular to my path, cutting through the forest floor in both directions as far as I could see. I stopped and checked my GPS. Nothing. No property lines, no trail markers, nothing that explained why someone would build a fence out here. The posts were sunk deep, professional work, and when I ran my hand along the top rail, I could feel it had been sanded smooth. Recent work, maybe within the last year. That's when I noticed the symbols. They were small, carved into each post about halfway up, hand-painted in what looked like black ink or thin paint. The first one I examined closely was a simple circle with a single line through it. The next post had a circle with 2 lines, then 3. I followed the fence to the right, toward where it disappeared into the trees, and counted 7 more posts. Each one had a circle with an increasing number of lines through it. I'm a logical person. My first thought was survey markers, some kind of measurement system for a forestry study. But that didn't explain why the fence was so well built, or why it ran in such a perfectly straight line through terrain that wasn't easy to navigate. I decided to follow it west, back toward the main trail system. I figured I'd find a gate or an end point, maybe a sign that would explain what I was looking at. I checked my watch. It was 2:15. The fence just kept going. I walked for what I estimated was about 45 minutes, and the whole time those symbols kept changing. After the simple circles with lines, they became more complex. Circles with crosses inside, circles with spirals. Then shapes I didn't recognize, angular patterns that looked almost like crude letters from an alphabet I didn't know. Here's the thing that started bothering me. The forest on both sides of the fence was identical. Same density of trees, same underbrush, same rocky soil. It wasn't separating different types of terrain or different growth patterns. It was just there, splitting 2 halves of the same forest for no reason I could understand. By 3:30, I'd been walking along this fence for over an hour, and I hadn't seen a single break in it. Not a gate, not a gap, not even a damaged section. My GPS kept working fine, showed me exactly where I was, but there was nothing on the map that corresponded to this fence. It was like following something that didn't officially exist. I stopped to drink some water and noticed something that made my mouth go dry despite the hydration. The symbols on the posts behind me, the ones I'd already passed, looked different. I could have sworn the most recent one had been a circle with a diagonal line and a small dot. But when I turned around to check, it was a circle with 2 dots and a horizontal line. I told myself I was remembering wrong. I'd been walking for over an hour, not paying close attention to every single marking, but I took out my phone and photographed the next 3 posts ahead of me before I moved forward. Then I walked past them and turned back to compare. They'd changed. Not drastically, but small details were different. A line that had curved now looked straight. A dot that had been centered was now offset. I checked the photos. They didn't match what I was seeing. Look, I know how that sounds. I checked my phone's timestamp to make sure I hadn't somehow lost time. I checked my GPS again. Everything was normal except for these symbols that seemed to be shifting when I wasn't looking directly at them. I made a decision then that I still can't fully explain. Instead of turning back toward my campsite, I kept following the fence. I needed to find where it ended, needed to understand what I was dealing with. I walked faster, checking my watch every few minutes. 4 o'clock, 4:30, 5. The sun was starting to drop toward the horizon, and I realized I'd been walking along this fence for nearly 3 hours. I'd covered maybe 6 or 7 miles, and it just kept going, perfectly straight, perfectly maintained, cutting through the forest like someone had drawn a line with a ruler across the landscape. That's when I tried to cross it. I don't know why I hadn't thought to do it earlier. I could have just stepped over it, or crawled under the bottom rail. It was only 4 feet high. But when I approached it, intending to climb over and head north back toward the trail, something stopped me. I can't describe it properly. It wasn't a physical barrier. I could put my hand on the top rail, could lean my weight against it, but the thought of actually crossing it, of putting my leg over and stepping to the other side, created this sensation of wrongness that I felt in my chest and my stomach simultaneously, like my body knew something my brain hadn't figured out yet. I walked another mile, maybe 2, as the light started to fade. The symbols on the posts had become more elaborate, more numerous. Some posts had multiple markings now, stacked vertically, and I realized with a cold certainty that I couldn't remember seeing any posts with multiple symbols earlier. But when I turned to look behind me, they all had multiple markings now. Dozens of them, covering the posts in intricate patterns that I knew hadn't been there when I'd first seen them. My hands started shaking. I'm not someone who panics easily, but I checked my GPS again and saw that I'd been walking in a straight line for hours. The fence ran perfectly east to west. If I'd wanted to head north back to the trail, I should have been able to just walk away from it at any point. I tried again. Approached the fence with the intention of crossing it, of just forcing myself over it and walking north. The wrongness was stronger now, almost physically painful. It felt like trying to push 2 magnets together with the same poles facing each other. Some fundamental resistance that made it clear this wasn't meant to be crossed. That's when I understood what I was really looking at. The fence wasn't keeping anything out. It wasn't marking a boundary between 2 different areas. It was a trap, a line I'd been following for hours while something closed around me. The symbols weren't survey markers or forestry codes. They were counting something, tracking something, and I'd been too focused on finding an end to notice that I'd been walking in the exact pattern they'd been designed to create. I turned away from the fence and started walking north, directly away from it, forcing myself to put distance between me and that perfectly straight line of wood and symbols. I walked until my legs ached, until the fence was completely out of sight behind me, until I couldn't hear anything but my own breathing and the sound of my boots on the forest floor. It took me 4 hours to reach my campsite. I packed up in the dark, didn't bother with my tent, just shoved everything into my pack and started hiking back toward the trailhead by flashlight. I didn't stop moving until I reached my car 2 days later. I reported the fence to the Park Service, gave them the GPS coordinates, showed them the photos on my phone. The photos were all blank, just frames of out-of-focus forest, nothing clear enough to show what I'd seen. They sent someone to check the location I'd marked. They found nothing. No fence, no posts, no symbols. But here's what I can't stop thinking about. That last symbol I saw before I turned away, it was a circle with a single figure inside. It looked like a simplified human form, stick figure basic. And I counted the posts I'd passed that had symbols on them. I didn't mention this to the Park Service because it sounds insane, but I counted them later from memory, tracing my route on the map. The number matched my age exactly. 40 posts, 40 symbols, one for every year I've been alive. I'm going to tell you something I've never shared with anyone except the police, and even then I left parts out. I'm a timber cruiser. I mark boundary lines for logging operations in state forest land. It's solitary work, mostly just me, a compass, and flagging tape for 8 hours a day. I'm telling you this because what happened 3 months ago in the Gifford Pin show still doesn't make sense, and I need to say it out loud to someone who won't know my name. It was early October, dense fog rolling through the valleys like it does that time of year. I was working a section near the Lewis River, marking the perimeter for a selective harvest operation scheduled for late November. Standard job. I'd done the preliminary survey 2 weeks prior, knew the terrain, knew where the boundaries were supposed to run. The fog was thick enough that I was relying more on my compass and GPS than visual landmarks, but that's normal. You get used to it. About 2 hours into my shift, I started noticing pink flagging tape tied to branches at roughly chest height. Pink tape isn't unusual. Different crews use different colors, but these weren't where I'd marked anything on my first pass. I checked my notes. My route was supposed to arc northeast along a ridgeline. These flags were leading slightly northwest, into a drainage area that wasn't part of our contract zone. I figured another crew had been through, maybe doing a different survey I hadn't been told about. Poor communication between departments isn't exactly rare, but the spacing felt wrong. Flagging tape is usually tied every 50 to 75 feet for visibility. These were closer together, 30 feet, maybe less, almost like someone wanted to make absolutely sure they'd be seen, even in the fog. I followed them anyway. I know how that sounds. Here's the thing, curiosity is part of the job. You see something that doesn't match your paperwork, you check it out, take notes, report it. I wasn't thinking about anything weird. I was thinking about filing an incident report for overlapping survey work. The flags led me off the ridgeline and down into a grove of old-growth Douglas fir. The trees there were massive, some of them probably 300 years old. Trunks wide enough that it would take 3 people to wrap their arms around them. The canopy was so dense that even with the fog it felt darker, quieter. I could hear my boots on the duff, hear my own breathing, but that was it. No birds, no wind in the branches. I kept following the flags. They were tied at perfect intervals now, like someone had measured the distance. I remember thinking that was odd. Efficient, but odd. Most cruisers eyeball it. Measuring wastes time. That's when I heard my name. Not loud. Not even clear, really. Just a whisper that might have been the wind shaping itself into syllables. Jeffrey. Soft, like someone calling from a distance. I stopped walking, turned a slow circle. The fog made it impossible to see more than 40 feet in any direction. I called out, "Hello." My voice sounded flat, like the trees were swallowing it. No response. I waited maybe 30 seconds, then kept moving. Told myself it was nothing, just the forest doing what forests do, playing tricks with sound. Then I heard it again. Jeffrey. Same tone, same volume, but this time it was coming from my left, somewhere deeper in the grove. I stopped again. My hands were cold. Not from the weather. From something else, something I couldn't name yet. I should have turned back. I know that now. But the flags kept going, and I told myself I just needed to see where they ended, confirm they weren't part of our project, then I'd head back to the truck and file my report. That was the plan. Simple, professional. The flags led me another 200 yards, maybe more. The grove got denser. The trees were so close together in places that I had to turn sideways to squeeze through. I remember thinking that this area would never be logged. Too difficult to access. Too much risk of damaging the old growth. So why were the flags here? Then I heard my name again. Closer this time. Jeffrey. Clear enough that I could tell it was a man's voice, or something approximating one. It was coming from directly ahead where the next flag should have been. I stopped walking. My chest felt tight. I pulled out my GPS to check my position, and that's when I saw how far off route I'd gone. I was almost a quarter mile from where I was supposed to be, and according to the topographic overlay, I was heading straight toward a ravine that dropped nearly 200 feet into a creek bed. The last flag was tied to a branch about 15 feet ahead of me. I could see it through the fog, swaying slightly even though there was no wind. Beyond it, the ground just stopped, the edge of the ravine. I walked up to the flag slowly, every step feeling wrong, and looked down. The ravine was steep, almost vertical in places. The bottom was invisible through the fog, but I could hear water running down there, faint and distant. No trails, no way to climb down without gear. If someone fell from here, they wouldn't be found quickly, maybe not at all depending on the season. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, just staring, and then I heard my name again. Right behind me, Jeffrey. I spun around so fast I almost lost my balance. There was no one there, just trees and fog and silence. But the sound had been close. Close enough that I should have been able to see whoever said it. That's when I noticed the other flags. There were more of them, tied to branches on trees surrounding the ravine edge, forming a rough semicircle. I hadn't seen them before because I'd been focused on the line leading me here. But now, looking at them, I realized they'd been placed deliberately, not to mark a boundary, to mark a spot. I pulled out my radio and tried to call my supervisor. No signal. I was too deep in the grove, too far below the ridgeline. My phone had no service either. I was alone, standing at the edge of a ravine, surrounded by markers that had led me here with the precision of someone who knew exactly where I'd be and when. I started walking back the way I'd come, moving faster than I should have in the fog, not caring if I tripped. I didn't follow the flags this time. I used my compass and GPS, forcing myself to head southeast back toward the ridgeline. My name kept echoing through the trees, sometimes ahead of me, sometimes behind, always just out of sight. Jeffrey. Jeffrey. It took me 40 minutes to get back to the logging road. My truck was still there, untouched. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there shaking for I don't know how long before I could steady my hands enough to drive. I reported the incident to my supervisor the next day, told him about the flags, about the ravine, left out the part about hearing my name. He sent another crew out to check. They found the flags exactly where I said they'd be, but here's the thing. The tape wasn't standard issue. It wasn't any brand our company uses, or any brand the state uses. The plastic was thicker, heavier. The color was slightly off, more salmon than pink. Whoever put them there had gone out of their way to make them look official without actually being official. The crew removed all the flags and filed a report with the county sheriff. They investigated, found nothing. No footprints, no signs of anyone camping in the area. The tape had been out there for weeks, maybe longer, based on the weathering. Long enough that whoever placed them knew the area would be surveyed eventually, knew someone would follow them. I'm going to tell you something I've never shared with anyone, not even my wife. I don't expect you to believe it, but I need to get it out. I'm an electrician by trade, 42 years old, mortgage, 2 kids in college. On weekends I go caving, nothing extreme, just mapped systems, the kind of hobby that keeps me sane after 40 hours of rewiring suburban kitchens. For context, I'm not the type who believes in this stuff. I troubleshoot electrical panels. I deal in concrete reality. 3 months ago, I was exploring a basalt cave system on the eastern flank of Mount St. Helens. Registered system, documented in the 1990s, but hardly anyone goes there anymore since the access road washed out. I'd studied the survey maps for weeks. The main passage was supposed to dead end about 800 feet in, but I'd noticed a side tunnel on the old charts marked with a question mark and the word tight. I went in alone. I know, first rule of caving, never solo. But I told my wife where I'd be, left a note in my truck with my route and expected return time. I had 3 LED headlamps, backup batteries, rope, the works. It was supposed to be a 4-hour trip. The main tunnel was straightforward. Wet basalt, some beautiful columnar formations, nothing unusual. I found the side passage exactly where the map indicated, a narrow crack that required me to turn sideways and shuffle. My pack barely fit. The walls were slick with moisture and the air had that particular cold mineral smell you get in volcanic rock. I'd gone maybe 50 feet into this side passage when the character of the stone changed. The natural basalt gave way to something that felt carved, not smooth, but deliberately widened. Tool marks, maybe. Hard to say. The passage opened into a small chamber maybe 10 feet across, and that's where I saw it. A door. Not a rock formation that looked like a door. An actual wooden door, heavy timber, set into a frame that had been mortared directly into the basalt. Painted institutional green, the kind of green you see in old schools or government buildings. Completely out of place, obviously. Impossibly out of place 800 feet inside a mountain. I stood there for probably 2 full minutes just staring at it. My headlamp beam made the green paint look sick, almost fluorescent against the black rock. The door had no handle, no visible hinges on my side, just 4 heavy bolts protruding from the frame, heads painted the same green. Near the bottom, maybe 6 inches from the floor, someone had drilled a perfectly round hole about the diameter of a quarter. Here's the thing. I should have turned around right then. Every rational cell in my body was screaming at me to leave. But I'm an electrician. I solve problems. I need to understand how things work, and this door made no sense. How did it get here? Who built it? When? I knelt down and examined the frame. The mortar was old, crumbling in places, but the door itself seemed solid. No rot, no warping. I put my glove against the wood and it was cold, far colder than the ambient cave temperature. The paint had a texture to it, thick and slightly rough, like it had been applied in multiple coats over many years. The hole at the bottom was clean drilled, perfectly circular. I could see darkness beyond it, but my headlamp beam wouldn't penetrate far enough to show me what was on the other side. The edge of the hole was worn smooth, like something had been pushed through it repeatedly over a long period of time. I don't know why I did what I did next. Curiosity, maybe. Stupidity, definitely. I lay down on my stomach on the wet cave floor and put my face close to that hole. The smell that came through was wrong. Not decay exactly, but something organic and stale, like a sealed room that hasn't had fresh air in decades. And underneath that, something else. Antiseptic, maybe? The kind of chemical smell you associate with hospitals or laboratories. I held my breath and listened. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Not even the drip of water I'd been hearing throughout the cave system. Just nothing. Like the space beyond the door was swallowing sound. Then, very faintly, I heard it. A wet, scraping sound, like something being dragged across concrete. slow, deliberate. It would move a few inches, stop, then move again. The moment I exhaled, and I'm absolutely certain of this, the sound stopped. I held my breath again, listened. Nothing. I breathed normally. Still nothing. Whatever was on the other side of that door had heard me. I knew it with the same certainty I know which wire is hot when I'm working a panel. Something was in there, and it had become aware of me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely push myself up off the ground. The rational part of my brain was trying to explain it away. Animals, water sounds, acoustic tricks in the rock. But I'd been caving for 15 years. I know what natural sounds are. This wasn't natural. I backed away from the door, keeping my headlamp trained on it, half expecting it to open. It didn't. The green paint just sat there in my light beam, looking wrong and institutional and deliberately placed in this impossible location. That's when I noticed the scratches. All around the frame, deep gouges in the basalt, like something had tried to claw its way out. Not around the edges of the door itself. Those bolts looked secure, but around the frame, behind where the door would swing, if it opened inward. Long parallel marks, 4 or 5 at a time, scored deep into volcanic rock that's harder than concrete. I ran. I squeezed back through that narrow passage so fast I tore my jacket, scraped both shoulders raw. I didn't stop running until I was back in the main tunnel, and even then I kept moving at a pace that had me gasping for air. I was back at my truck in under an hour. I've tried researching it. Old mining operations, forgotten government installations, geological survey stations. Nothing. There's no record of any structure being built in those caves. No permits, no documentation, nothing. The USGS surveys from the 90s don't mention a door. I've contacted them directly. They think I'm either confused or making it up. But I know what I saw. I went back 2 weeks later. Brought a friend, a guy I've known since high school, told him I wanted to show him some interesting formations. I had a camera, extra lights, rope. We got to the side passage, and I went in first. It was gone. Not the passage, that was still there, still tight, still wet. But the chamber where the door had been was just solid rock. Natural basalt, columnar formations. No evidence anything had ever been there. No frame, no mortar, no drill holes. I spent an hour examining every square foot of that chamber. My friend thought I'd gotten disoriented, mixed up my locations. But I know I was in the right place. I had waypoints on my GPS. I took photos of the tunnel entrance, the same distinctive formations. It was the same chamber. Last week I got a package. No return address, postmarked from Yakima. Inside was a single brass key, old and heavy, with a round barrel and a complex bit pattern. Wrapped around it was a strip of green fabric, the exact shade of that door. There was no note, no explanation. I keep the key in my toolbox now, and sometimes late at night when I'm working in someone's basement, I think about that wet scraping sound and how it stopped the instant it knew I was there. I think about those scratches in the rock. I think about how something had to have been contained deliberately, with bolts and mortar and a door 800 feet inside a mountain, and how someone went to great lengths to make sure whatever was behind it stayed there. I teach American history to sophomores at Eastmont High School, and I'm telling you this because I need you to understand. I'm not someone who loses their grip on reality. I grade papers. I coach JV basketball. I'm about as grounded as they come. Last October, I drove out to the Wenatchee National Forest for a solo weekend. I'd been watching bushcraft videos for months, the kind where guys with beards make fire from sticks and carve bowls from green wood, and I wanted to try it myself. My buddy Marcus had lent me this old carving knife his grandfather used. Real steel, worn wooden handle, the kind of tool that feels serious in your hand. I packed light. Tent, sleeping bag, some dried food, water filter. The goal was simple. Spend Saturday carving a bowl, prove to myself I could actually do something with my hands besides write on whiteboards. I found a spot about 3 miles off Forest Road 7300 near Icicle Creek. Dense pine cover, soft ground from recent rain, total silence except for the water moving over rocks. I set up camp in a small clearing, and by mid-morning Saturday I was sitting on a stump with a chunk of alder I'd found, trying to hollow out something that resembled a bowl. It went badly, I mean really badly. The knife was sharp, sure, but I had no idea what I was doing. The wood kept splitting in the wrong direction, my hands cramped up. By noon, I'd barely made a sad little divot in the wood. I kept at it anyway, stubborn, telling myself this was the whole point, to struggle through something real. By the time the light started fading around 6, I had this lopsided, rough thing that maybe could hold water if you were generous with the definition. It looked like a child made it, but it was mine, and I'd spent the entire day on it. I wrapped it in my fleece jacket and set it on top of my backpack inside the tent vestibule. I remember doing that specifically, tucking it in like it mattered. I cleaned Marcus's knife with my bandana, wiped it down with some oil I'd brought, then slid it into the side pocket of my pack. I was proud of myself in this small, tired way. Then I ate some trail mix, crawled into my sleeping bag, and passed out hard. When I woke up Sunday morning, the bowl was gone. In its place, sitting on top of the folded fleece exactly where I'd left the bowl, was a wooden bird. Not a carving, a sculpture. This thing was maybe 4 inches tall, some kind of songbird, perfectly proportioned. The grain of the wood, it looked like the same alder I'd been working, flowed with the shape of the body. The wings were tucked against its sides, each feather individually defined, tapering to points so fine I was afraid to touch them. The beak was slightly open. The eyes were just indentations, but they had this depth to them, this sense of expression. When I picked it up, it weighed almost nothing. The surface was smooth as glass. I sat there holding it for probably 5 minutes, not moving, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. My brain kept offering explanations that didn't work. Maybe I'd carved this myself and didn't remember. But I'd barely managed to gouge out a depression in wood. This was work that required years of skill and patience. Maybe someone had swapped it as a prank. But I was 3 miles from the nearest trail, and I hadn't seen another person since I'd parked. That's when I checked the knife. It was back in my pack's side pocket where I'd put it, but it had been used. The blade was clean, cleaner than when I'd wiped it down, but there were fresh wood particles in the hinge where the blade met the handle. Someone had borrowed Marcus's knife, carved this bird, cleaned the blade carefully, and returned it. I unzipped the tent and looked outside. The ground around my tent was soft mud, still damp from rain 2 days before. When I'd set up camp, I'd left footprints everywhere, coming and going to the creek, gathering firewood, circling the tent to stake it down. Those prints were all still there, dried into the mud. There were no new ones. I walked around the entire campsite twice looking for any sign of disturbance. Nothing. The perimeter was undisturbed. My food bag was still hanging from the tree branch where I'd left it. The fire ring I'd made showed no signs anyone had added to it or moved the stones. Everything was exactly as I'd arranged it, except my sad little bowl was gone, and this impossible bird was sitting in my tent. I packed up fast. I'm not proud of how quickly I moved, but I couldn't stay there. The whole time I kept looking at the trees, half expecting to see someone watching. The bird I wrapped in my bandana and shoved into my pack. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe I needed proof this had actually happened. The hike back to my car took under an hour. I kept my hand on the bear spray clipped to my belt, which was stupid. Bear spray doesn't help with whatever this was. When I reached the trailhead, there was one other vehicle in the lot, a ranger's truck. I sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to decide if I should report this. Report what, exactly? Someone snuck into my tent, didn't steal anything, left me a gift, and managed to do it without leaving tracks? I drove home. I didn't tell Marcus about the knife when I returned it the next week. I didn't tell anyone. The bird is in my desk drawer at school right now, wrapped in the same bandana. I've looked at it maybe a dozen times, always when I'm alone in my classroom. Every time I notice new details, the way the talons curl with the exact tension of a bird gripping a branch, the subtle hollow beneath the wings where they meet the body. It's flawless. It would have taken hours, maybe days. Whoever made it was in my tent while I slept. They had to be. The knife was inside my pack, inside the vestibule, less than 2 feet from my head. They could have done anything. Instead, they showed me the difference between what I thought I could do and what they could do with the same piece of wood, the same knife, probably in less time than I'd spent failing all day. I haven't been back to Wenatchee. Marcus keeps asking when I want to borrow the knife again. I tell him I'm too busy with work. I don't sleep well on weekends anymore. I keep thinking about the silence of it. How someone moved through mud without leaving prints, unzipped my tent without waking me, worked inches from my face in the dark. How they knew exactly where I'd put everything, how long I'd be asleep. The worst part is the bird's eyes, those small indentations that somehow suggest expression. Sometimes I think they look patient, like whoever made this is still out there, still watching, still waiting to show me what else they can do. I'm Alan White, 50 years old, 30 years as a park ranger before I retired last spring. I'm telling you this so you understand. I know these trails better than I know my own neighborhood. 3 weeks after a minor knee surgery, my doctor cleared me for light activity. I decided to hike the Maple Ridge Loop outside Portland, a trail I've walked maybe 200 times. 5 miles, well-maintained, popular enough that you're never truly alone. I needed to clear my head, get my legs working again. Normal stuff. I parked at the trailhead around 9 in the morning, Tuesday, overcast but dry. The parking lot was nearly empty, just my truck and a silver sedan I didn't recognize. I stretched, locked up, and headed in. The first mile was exactly as I remembered. Douglas firs, the creek babbling off to the left, that distinctive smell of wet bark and moss. My knee felt good. I was making decent time. Then I reached the first junction marker. The sign was wrong. Not just wrong, impossible. The wooden post said Ravensbrook Junction with an arrow pointing west. I'd never heard that name in 30 years. This junction had always been called Fern Crossing. I stood there staring at it, thinking maybe the Park Service had updated the signage and I'd missed a memo. But that didn't make sense. I'd retired, sure, but I still talked to guys on the crew. Someone would have mentioned it. I kept walking, told myself I was being paranoid, that the surgery meds were still messing with my head somehow. Half a mile later, another sign. This one said Echo Point, 2.3 miles, with an arrow pointing north. Echo Point was a lookout on an entirely different trail system, 10 miles from here. And the distance was wrong regardless. I'd walked this section countless times. The next landmark should have been the picnic area, less than a mile ahead. My hands started feeling cold. I pulled out my phone to check the trail map I'd downloaded years ago, but I had no service. I never had service this deep in. That wasn't new. What was new was the sick feeling spreading through my chest. I decided to turn back. Simple as that. When something feels wrong on a trail, you don't push forward. That's basic safety. I turned around and walked back toward the junction. It took me maybe 15 minutes. But when I reached the signpost, the one that had said Ravensbrook Junction, all the paint was gone. Completely stripped off. Just bare weathered wood. No text, no arrows, nothing. The post looked like it had been blank for years, sun-faded, slightly warped. I stood there for a long time. I don't know how long enough that my knee started aching from standing still. The thing is, I'd touched that sign 20 minutes earlier. I'd run my fingers over the carved letters while I was trying to make sense of the name. The grooves had been deep, freshly painted. Now there was nothing, just smooth wood with a few splinters. I started walking faster, back toward the trailhead. My knee didn't matter anymore, I just needed to get out. But the trail didn't look right. The trees seemed denser, the undergrowth thicker. I kept telling myself it was just my anxiety distorting things, but then I reached another junction I didn't recognize. 3 paths. No sign at all. Not even a post. I tried to reason through it. The main trail should be to my right. That's where the parking lot was. I was sure of it. But when I looked down that path, I saw another wooden sign about 50 yards ahead. I walked toward it. Memory Creek, 0.8 miles. An arrow pointing straight ahead, deeper into the forest. There is no Memory Creek. I've studied every map of this area. I've led search and rescue operations here. I know every named feature within 15 miles. Memory Creek doesn't exist. I pulled out my compass. The needle spun lazily, never settling. I shook it, thinking it was broken, but the spinning was too smooth, too deliberate, like something was guiding it in slow circles. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned fast, my bad knee protesting. Nobody there, just trees and shadows and that smell of damp earth. But I'd heard boots on packed dirt. I know that sound. Someone had been walking behind me. Hello? My voice sounded thin, swallowed by the forest. No response. But I heard it again. Footsteps. Maybe 20 feet to my left now, moving parallel to me. I couldn't see anyone. The undergrowth wasn't that thick. I started moving again, faster now, ignoring the pain in my knee. I didn't care which direction anymore. I just needed to keep moving. Every few minutes I'd pass another sign. Whispering Junction, Forgotten Ridge, The Waiting Place, 1.4 miles. None of these names meant anything. The distances were nonsensical. One sign said I was 0.3 miles from the trailhead. The next said 4.7 miles. I was sweating despite the cold air. My breathing was getting shallow, wrong. I forced myself to stop, to lean against a tree and think clearly. I'm not the kind of person who panics. 30 years in the field, I'd dealt with lost hikers, medical emergencies, armed idiots shooting at trail signs. I knew how to stay calm, but this wasn't something I could logic my way through. When I looked up from catching my breath, I saw another hiker about 40 yards ahead. A woman, I thought, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. She was standing perfectly still, facing a trail sign. Relief hit me so hard I almost laughed. "Hey!" I called out, starting toward her. "Hey, can you help me? I think I'm turned around." She didn't move, didn't turn around or acknowledge me at all. I got within 20 feet before I realized she wasn't breathing. I couldn't see her chest moving, couldn't hear anything. She was just standing there, utterly motionless, staring at the sign. I stopped walking. "Ma'am?" Slowly, too slowly, her head began to turn toward me, not her body, just her head, rotating in a way that made my stomach drop. I didn't wait to see her face. I turned and ran. My knee screamed. I didn't care. I crashed through underbrush, stumbled over roots, kept moving. I don't know how long I ran. The trees blurred together. Every direction looked the same. Then I broke through into a clearing and stopped. The parking lot. My truck was right there, 20 feet away. The silver sedan was gone. I didn't look back. I got in my truck, locked the doors, and drove. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. It wasn't until I was on the highway that I started breathing normally again. I didn't tell anyone for a week. What would I say? That trail signs changed? That the forest rearranged itself? I sounded insane just thinking it. Last week I drove back to the trailhead. I didn't get out of the truck. I just sat there in the parking lot, staring at the wooden trail map posted near the entrance. All the names were correct. Fern Crossing, Picnic Meadow, Summit View. Every landmark exactly as I remembered, exactly as it had been for 30 years. But there was one new sign I'd never seen before, mounted right next to the trail map. Small, easy to miss unless you were looking for it. It said, Allen White Memorial Grove, 0.2 miles. My hands are shaking again just saying this out loud. I haven't been back. I don't know if I can, because here's what I can't stop thinking about. I never told anyone I was hiking that day. I didn't sign the trailhead register. My truck was the only vehicle in the lot. If something had happened to me out there, how long would it have taken for someone to notice I was gone? I'm Kenji Sato. I just graduated from UW in May, 22 years old, engineering degree. I'm a pretty rational person for context. I decided to take a month off before starting my job in September, wanted to do the whole solo backpacking thing in the Cascades, challenge myself, live off the grid for a bit. My parents thought I was being dramatic, but I'd done plenty of day hikes before. I figured I could handle it. The first week was exactly what I needed. Quiet. Just me, my tent, and the sound of wind through Douglas firs. I stuck to established trails during the day, set up camp before dark, cooked freeze-dried meals on my little stove. By day 8, I was feeling confident enough to explore some of the less traveled areas. That's when I found the line. I was walking along a narrow game trail about 2 miles from where I'd camped the night before. The terrain was getting denser, thick underbrush, fallen logs covered in moss, that earthy smell that gets into everything. I was watching my footing when my ankle caught on something. Not hard enough to trip me, just enough to make me stop and look down. At first, I thought it was a spider web. The light was hitting it at just the right angle. This thin, nearly invisible line strung across the path at ankle height, pulled tight between 2 young hemlocks about 4 feet apart. I crouched down to get a better look. It wasn't organic. It was some kind of synthetic monofilament, the kind you'd use for fishing line maybe, but thicker, stronger. When I plucked it with my finger, it barely gave. Someone had tied it there deliberately, with purpose. I stood up and looked around. The forest was quiet. No birds, which I remember noticing because there had been birds all morning. I told myself it was probably a trail marker, some unconventional way of marking a route, but it didn't make sense. It was strung too low, positioned exactly where someone would trip over it if they weren't paying attention. I stepped over it and kept walking. 50 feet later, I found another one. Same height, same tension, same precise placement between 2 trees. Look, I'm not an idiot. I knew this wasn't normal. But I was also curious in that stupid way people get when they haven't seen another human being in over a week. I thought maybe it was some kind of research thing, wildlife monitoring or forestry work. I kept following the trail and the lines kept appearing, every 50 feet like clockwork. After the 5th one, I realized they weren't following the game trail anymore. They were leading me off it, angling gradually to the left into thicker brush where the canopy got darker and the ground was mostly rotted logs and ferns. I should have turned back. I know that now. But there was something about the precision of it that kept me moving forward. Each line was placed with the exact same care, the exact same tension. Someone had spent hours doing this. I wanted to know why. The line started zigzagging. One would pull me left, the next would angle back right, then left again, weaving me through sections of the forest that had no business being navigable. I had to duck under branches, climb over deadfall, push through stands of salal that grabbed at my jacket. My GPS watch was useless under the canopy. Signal kept dropping. I stopped checking it after a while. By the time I reached the 11th or 12th line, my hands were shaking, not from exertion, from something else. The forest had gone completely silent. No wind, no insects, nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing and the occasional crack of a twig under my boots. The line stopped at the mouth of a dry creek bed. The last one was strung between a cedar and a boulder, and beyond it, the creek bed dropped down maybe 6 feet, cutting through the hillside in a narrow channel barely wide enough for a person to walk through. The walls were steep, covered in exposed roots and loose dirt. The bottom was lined with smooth stones, bone dry despite the recent rain we'd had earlier in the week. I stood at the edge for a long time. I don't know how long. Long enough for my calves to start aching. I kept telling myself to turn around, to follow the lines back to the trail, to get the hell out of there. But I couldn't stop staring into that creek bed because I could hear something. It was faint, rhythmic, a soft scraping sound like metal on stone followed by a pause, then the sound again. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. It was coming from deeper in the channel, maybe 30 or 40 feet ahead, around a bend where the creek bed curved out of sight. I don't know why this detail stuck with me, but the stones at the bottom of the creek bed were arranged too neatly. They weren't random, they'd been cleared from the center, stacked along the edges in careful piles, creating a clear walkway down the middle. Someone had spent time down there. The scraping sound stopped, just cut off mid-rhythm. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. I remember my breath catching in my throat, that tightness in your chest when your body realizes something before your brain does. I waited, counted to 30 in my head. The sound didn't come back. What I heard instead was worse. Footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps on dry stone moving away from me, deeper into the creek bed. And then, fainter, almost too quiet to be sure, the sound of something being tied off. A sharp little snap of tension, like a knot being pulled tight. They were stringing the next section, ahead of me, while I was standing there. I backed away from the creek bed, didn't turn around, just backed up step by step until I was far enough into the brush that I couldn't see the opening anymore. Then I ran. I didn't try to follow the lines back. I just crashed through the forest in what I hoped was the right direction. Branches whipping my face, roots trying to catch my feet. I don't remember most of it. I just remember the taste of copper in my mouth and the way my lungs burned, and the certainty that if I stopped moving, I'd hear those footsteps again, closer this time. It took me 3 hours to find my way back to the main trail. By then, it was getting dark. I packed up my camp that night, hiked out the next morning, and drove straight home. Didn't stop except for gas. I'm a long-haul trucker. I've been doing this for 6 years, and I'm telling you this because I need you to understand. I've spent hundreds of nights alone in my cab, parked in places most people wouldn't even drive through in daylight. Last month, I had a pickup scheduled at a lumber mill outside Packwood, Washington. The load wasn't ready until morning, so I pulled into this wide spot on a logging road about 15 miles out. It was one of those unmarked pull-offs that truckers use, flat enough, quiet, nothing around for miles. I'd been there before, never had a problem. I got there around 8 in the evening. It was October, so full dark came fast. I ate my dinner, checked my phone, no signal, which was normal out there, and settled in to watch something I'd downloaded. The cab was warm. Engine idling. Everything routine. Around 10:30, I looked up from my tablet and noticed a light on the ridge across from me. The ridge was maybe 2 miles off, covered in dense Douglas fir. Steep terrain. The kind where even loggers don't bother going because the trees aren't worth the equipment risk. And there was this light, steady, yellowish, like a lantern or a dim porch light, just sitting there in the dark. I stared at it for a while, tried to make sense of it. There weren't any roads over there, no trails I knew of, no reason for anyone to be up there at night, but the light didn't move, didn't flicker, just stayed fixed in one spot. I told myself it was a ranger station I didn't know about, or maybe some hunter's camp. I went back to my show. Every 10 minutes or so, I'd glance out the window. The light was always there, same position, same dull glow. I fell asleep sometime after midnight. When I woke up, it was just past 6 in the morning. Gray dawn light, heavy fog sitting in the valley. I looked toward the ridge. The light was gone. I started my coffee, checked my load time. Still another 2 hours before I needed to be at the mill. I was brushing my teeth when I heard it. A phone ringing. Not my phone, not a ringtone, an old rotary phone. That mechanical, urgent trill that sounds like it's coming from inside your skull. And it was loud, too loud, like it was right outside my truck. I opened the door and climbed down. The ringing was coming from the woods behind me, maybe 50 yards in. Clear as anything. I could hear each ring, the gap between them, even the slight metallic scrape of the mechanism. I stood there listening. It rang 12 times, then stopped. The silence afterward felt worse than the sound. I got back in the cab, told myself it was some weird echo or a speaker someone left behind or, I don't know, something. I wasn't about to walk into the woods to check. That's not stupidity, that's just common sense. An hour later, it rang again, this time closer, maybe 30 yards from the truck. Same sound, same rhythm. 15 rings, then silence. I locked the doors. I know how that sounds. It's a truck cab, not a fortress, but I locked them anyway. By 8:30, I needed to leave for the mill. I started the engine, checked my mirrors. The ringing started again, right at the tree line, 20 feet from my passenger side. I could see into the woods now. The fog had lifted some. There was nothing there. No phone, no person. Just trees and underbrush and that sound, ringing and ringing like someone was standing there holding it out toward me. I put the truck in gear. The ringing stopped. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, hands on the wheel, trying to convince myself to just drive. But here's the thing. The mill was another 15 miles up that same logging road. One way in, one way out. And something in my gut told me that if I drove deeper into those woods, I wasn't going to like what I found. I called the mill on my CB, told them I had engine trouble, needed a few hours. They weren't happy, but they'd wait. The ringing didn't start again until noon. This time it came from the woods on the driver's side, close enough that I could hear the individual mechanical clicks between rings. I didn't open the door. I didn't look. I sat there staring straight ahead, jaw clenched, waiting for it to stop. It rang 40 times. I counted. When it stopped, I heard something else. Footsteps. Not on pavement. On the soft dirt and pine needles crunching slowly from the tree line toward the truck. I looked. There was a figure standing at the edge of the woods, maybe 15 feet from my door. It was a person, I think, human-shaped, wearing dark clothes, or maybe just dark. I couldn't make out features because the shadows under the trees were too deep, even in full daylight, but I could see its arm extended, and in its hand it was holding something. A telephone. The old kind, with the curled cord hanging down. It wasn't plugged into anything. We stayed like that for a long time, me staring from inside the cab, it standing there with the phone held out like an offering, or a threat. Then it turned and walked back into the trees. Smooth, deliberate steps, no hurry. I started the engine and drove. I don't care what the mill said, I wasn't staying there another second. I took the logging road at 40 miles an hour, which is insane on those turns, but I didn't slow down until I hit pavement. I never picked up that load. I called the company from a truck stop in Yakima, told them I quit. They kept my last paycheck. I don't care. Here's what I can't stop thinking about. When I looked in my side mirror as I was driving away, I saw it again. Standing in the middle of the road behind me, still holding that phone. And I swear to God, even over the engine noise and the gravel under my tires, I could still hear it ringing.